There exists a moment, one that happens once in a lifetime, in every lifetime, when you least expect it, when the stars align, when your heart is in just the right place. For me, that moment came the day I watched The Flash. Lame, right? Hi, my name's Itopher. It's like the name Topher, but with an I at the front. It's a pretty revolutionary idea, putting an I in front of another word to make another word, but I think it's going to catch on. So The Flash has been getting a lot of press recently, and depending on the way that you interpret that sentence, that could mean anything. The TV show's wrapping up, there's a new trailer for the new movie that's coming out soon, and I don't know if you've heard about this, but there's also this person that's been running around like The Flash recently, and they've not been doing the best sort of stuff. But what I'd like to talk about today is the first thing I mentioned, the TV show. Specifically the first season. Now, there's been a whole host of videos recently talking about how The Flash fell off, and look, for the most part I kind of agree, but one thing that I never want to be forgotten is the fact that it wasn't always that way. For a long time, The Flash was the king, and I personally believe that the first season of the TV show is probably the best superhero show ever made. Let's get something out of the way first. Do I really think that that statement is objectively true? Look, in my subjective opinion, I don't think there's such thing as an objective opinion, so I am going to say yes, I do think The Flash is the best superhero show of all time, objectively. You see, this is what I was talking about at the start. There's a moment in everyone's adolescence where you either watch or you read or you hear something that just sticks with you for the rest of your life, and no matter what anyone says, you're just going to think it's the best piece of media that ever existed. You see this a lot with the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. Now, I'm not saying that they're bad movies. I'm just saying that I think a lot of people are maybe a tiny bit blinded by their childhood wonder. Look, if that was the first superhero movie or Spider-Man movie you saw as a kid or even an adult, I can understand how you could get attached to them. For a while, I couldn't. But then I took a look at myself in the mirror. Now, I'm almost 100% certain that The Flash is not as good as I made it out to be in my head, but I just can't help but love it. And look, whether you're a fan of Taylor Swift or Catcher in the Rye or some other third thing, I bet you can probably relate. I don't think I can make you like The Flash as much as I do, but I do think that I can hopefully show you why me and so many other people love it so much. And if I can convince you to even watch 5 minutes of the first episode, I'll be happy. So come with me as we embark on a journey into what I believe is one of the greatest superhero stories ever told.
My name is Barry Allen, and I am the fastest man alive. When I was a child, I saw my mother killed by something impossible. My father went to prison for her murder. Then an accident made me the impossible. To the outside world, I'm an ordinary forensic scientist, but secretly, I use my speed to fight crime and find others like me. And one day, I'll find who killed my mother and get justice for my father. I am The Flash.
The CW network, for most of its life, had primarily focused on airing a lot of rom-com and drama TV shows, until one day, in 2012, some CEO got really drunk and accidentally greenlit a softcore superhero show called Arrow. The show was centered around Oliver Queen, who a lot of comic book readers might have known as the Green Arrow, and it followed his journey of becoming a superhero who lost his adjective. Arrow was a weird mix of superhero action and all the tropes the CW network had fallen in love with over the years. Imagine Gilmore Girls, but one of them murders people. Something about it just worked, and as such, it gained a massive audience. Its first season spanned 23 40-minute episodes, and by the time it reached its conclusion, people were clamoring for more. So, on the advent of the Avengers that same year, the CW got the idea to start their own little cinematic universe, and when the second season of Arrow started to air, eagle-eyed viewers would begin to notice that they were teasing a Flash TV show. Well, pigeon-eyed viewers, it was pretty obvious. This was a big deal, not to discount the scope of Arrow, but The Flash required a little bit more than a man with a green suit and a bow. It would have to somehow make a man running at the speed of sound look natural. This was before Disney started throwing oodles of money at their shows, by the way. Huge CGI budgets were pretty foreign to most TV shows at this point, which made this show a pretty big gamble. Even with all the money you'd have to spend to get the CGI to look alright, you weren't guaranteeing the story was going to be good. I mean, looking at some of the previous things that aired on the CW, it probably wasn't. But sure enough, the time came. Grant Gustin, the actor that would come to play the titular character, made an appearance on Arrow in 2013, and the following year, The Flash raced onto the CW network. And it was awesome.
We're now being told to evacuate the facility. The storm may have caused a malfunction to the primary cooling system. Officials are now trying to shut down the particle accelerator, and so far have been unable to regain control of the system.
The first season of The Flash is incredible. It's pure, unadulterated magic, and that's shown no better than in the pilot. I love the Flash pilot. You see, a pilot isn't just a pitch to a bunch of CEOs and execs, it's a pitch to your audience. And more often than not, that first pitch isn't usually that great. Have you seen the first episode of Sesame Street? Where the hell is Elmo? The Flash has 40-something minutes to sell you on its plot, its characters, and its world, and I'll be damned if it doesn't use each of those minutes so well. Barry Allen is an ordinary forensic scientist, don't you forget it, and though he's been picked on and bullied most his life, he's made it through with a heart of gold and some help from his loving dads. He has like 40 dads, by the way, but that's a story for another time. Unfortunately, when Barry was just a wee lad, his mother was murked by a mysterious man in yellow, a supernatural event that's haunted him long into his adult life. His dad was blamed for the murder, and poor Barry was sent to live with his foster parent, Joe West, and foster sister, turned foster lover, Iris. Very typical setup for a superhero story, by the way. Murdered parents has led to a life of fighting crime in so many stories that the orphan to superhero conversion rate's gotta be like 75% at least by this point. But the man in yellow and the overall mystery just surrounding him is so intrinsically linked to Barry's character arc and the overall narrative of the show that it makes the story really interesting. I'll talk about that a little bit more later though. Anywho, our story picks up the day Star Laboratories is set to launch its new particle accelerator, a science machine that's going to do science things, and due to a series of unfortunate events, it explodes, and Barry is subsequently struck by a superpowered bolt of lightning. Barry goes into a coma for 9 months, and when he wakes, he realizes he's really good at catching coffee mugs, and from there, things start to get a little crazy. The rest of the episode follows the tenets of a superhero origin story, but each part is done so simply and effectively that I can't help but admire even some of the most stereotypical aspects of it. Nothing is off here. The motivations of every character are easily understandable, and the journey Barry takes to eventually become the Flash and defeat the bad guy is concise and at parts really goddamn heartwarming. There's a speech towards the end of the pilot that is iconic to any person that's even a small fan of the show, and the episode ends on a conversation between Barry and his father that, thanks to the incredible performances of Grant Gustin and John Wesley Shipp, makes me cry like a little baby every goddamn time. Before we cut to credits, however, there's a small tease that sets up the larger mystery of the show, and that's what I want to talk about next. I'm intentionally dodging a lot of spoilers here because I really just want people to see this stupid thing. But this next part's going to be a bit difficult to dodge stuff. I'm going to do my best, but just stick with me. The structure of The Flash is pretty simple. Each week there's a new villain that Barry has to defeat, and although it usually takes a couple chats in a hallway to give him the confidence he needs to beat them, Barry always gets it done. But it doesn't matter how many times he defeats the bad guy, there's one thing that Barry wants more than anything else, and that is to stop the Man in Yellow, avenge his mother, and get justice for his father. The Man in Yellow, a character that comes to be known as a Reverse Flash, is the ultimate enigma of Barry's past. Why this superpowered force of nature killed Barry's mother is a mystery to him, and while the audience is always a couple steps ahead of Barry, it never stops keeping you guessing. The mystery of the show, for the most part, isn't about who, it's about why, which makes it really unique. Every time you think you got your head around what's going on, the show throws a spanner in the works that'll make you reevaluate everything. If the only thing you know about the Flash going into this is that he runs fast, like I and many other people did when they first saw this, you're gonna have a really good time trying to crack the case. Also, a lot of people talk about how supervillains' motivations suck most of the time. It used to be that they didn't really have any at all, and nowadays they do have motivation, but then they just kill people for some random reason. The Reverse Flash isn't like that. This guy is evil through and through, but he still has a really good reason for the things he does and doesn't do. A lot of the stuff might initially seem like plot contrivances at first, but it actually ends up making sense in the end. I'm being very vague, but I think the Reverse Flash and the mystery around him is one of the main reasons you should watch the show, and so I think it's kind of better if I don't say anything more. The story of The Flash is more than just its main plot though. There's a lot of other moving cogs in this thing that help it transcend the normal superhero schlock. I mentioned earlier that the show sort of follows a villain of the week format. Every single week there's a new villain that comes out of the woodworks, and it's good old Barry's job to stop them. I know that seems very simple and plain, but Each of these villains are really unique, and I think that they're worth talking about.
Pretty much all of the week-to-week villains have a solid motivation, and it typically stems from the night the particle accelerator exploded. All of them have been adversely affected by this freak supernatural event, and it influences them in different ways. Some see themselves as gods, others are motivated by their toxic relationships, and some are just lost and confused and don't know what's going on. Barry's constantly forced to question his place in all of this as well, because it quickly becomes clear to him that without the help of the people he loves, he might as well have just ended up like one of these guys. They're all in situations that are understandable considering where they've come from, and sometimes the only difference between them and Barry is their background. It's also great watching the team at Star Labs come to terms with the fact that a lot of the terrible stuff going on in the city is their fault. Harrison Wells in particular has a couple great moments where he's forced to reflect upon his mistakes. Puts the heroes and villains in this grey area a bit, in terms of what's right and wrong, and I think that's what all good superhero stories should do. Some particular episode shoutouts that I think are really great examples of this diverse cast of villains is Episode 4, Going Rogue featuring Captain Cold, Episode 6, The Flash is Born featuring Gerder, Episode 7, Power Outage featuring Blackout and the Clock King, Episode 11, The Sound and the Fury featuring the Pied Piper, and finally what might be my favourite episode of the show, barring maybe the pilot and the finale, Episode 15, Out of Time, starring the Weather Wizard. These episodes all have very different villains that all work equally well, and they're all worth watching out for when you come across them, so keep an eye out.
Why else though? Why else should you watch? How about the characters? I really love the cast of characters here, and I love all the actors that play them as well. This part's going to be a long one though, so strap in.
Let's start with Barry. I've already talked a lot about him, so I'll be brief. Barry. Barry Allen is an ordinary forensic scientist who blah 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 blah. Barry's a lot like Peter Parker in this, in that he's just sort of a bit of a nerd who doesn't have the confidence to tell the girl he likes about his feelings. Where he differs though, and what I really like about him, is that he's really obsessed with his past. He doesn't get closure like Peter does. No one believes what him and his father saw the night his mother was murdered, because why would you? And until the show starts, he has no way of proving the world otherwise. You sort of get the idea that Barry was on the brink of maybe coming to terms with everything that happened when all of a sudden he was struck by lightning and put back to square one. Grant Gustin is perfect as the Flash, and I hope he continues to play the role going forward into the new DCEU, provided he has another decade or so of his life spare to give.
Next character. Zzz.
Cisco and Caitlin. These guys serve the role of Barry's only friends, which is a little sad because he only meets them at the start of the show. They're both massive nerds, but in different ways. He's geeky, she's stilted. You know, they make a nice odd couple. What I like about these guys and the way that they interact with Barry is that they're all just really good friends. Like, they all just have a really great relationship that beyond the first couple episodes is rarely called into question. Cisco serves as the stereotypical comic relief a lot of the time, but he's so earnest that I can't help but love him, and Caitlin's uptightness and overall demeanor makes it really sweet when she's able to break through and have moments of genuine vulnerability. Their actors, Carlos Valdez and Danielle Panabaker, are both fantastic, and I'd like to give a particular shout-out moment for both of them. For Danielle Panabaker, I'm going to say any scene where you get to see her and her currently on-fire dead fiancé interact is always really sweet, and a large part of that is thanks to her performance. And for Carlos Valdez, there's a scene towards the back half of the show where he delivers what I consider to be one of the best expressions of pure fear ever. It's so genuine to his character, and the whole scene is so good. Just watch the show.
Next up on the list is Iris, but I'm actually going to talk about her in a later part of the video because there's a lot of issues that exist with her character, and I feel like I need a bit more time to dive in depth with them. One thing to note though, and I'm like the 10,000th person saying this, but none of the issues with Iris's character are Candace Patton's fault. She's fantastic in the role. In fact, I'd say she's probably one of the best actors on the show. It just sort of sucks that she's been sidelined to whatever weird crap Iris has going on in any given season. I'll talk more on that later though. For now, let's talk about Barry's dads.
First up is his actual biological dad, Henry. I already talked about him and Barry a bit earlier, but I'll say a bit more here. Every single time Henry comes on screen, my tear ducts remember they are alive. The scenes between him and Barry are written and acted so damn well that it makes me just bawl. One of the few scenes from the original Justice League that people liked was Ezra Miller Flash having a chat with his Henry Allen, and I gotta tell you, that scene's fine and all, but it ain't got nothing on some of the stuff from this. Just watch it, you'll see. Anyway, John Wesley Shipp is great, and did you know that he played the Flash on the original TV show? Quote every single YouTube video on the Flash ever. Next up on the chopping block is Joe West. Joe West has been touted by the fans of the show as just a really good dad. And while I certainly can't agree with that fully, and I'll touch on that a bit more later, it is mostly true. He's definitely a good dad to Barry. Joe has the record number for most pep talks in any show ever, and thankfully they're all pretty good. He's a senior detective who's been working for years when all of a sudden his job and his beliefs are turned upside down. He has to navigate through this strange new world, much like Barry does, but it's his job to do what every good parent does and put on a brave face for his kid in even the most dire of situations. I haven't seen the Fast and the Furious movies, but I'm almost certain that the relationship between Joe and Barry is a way better example of how, even if you're not blood related, the people you love are still your family. Also, just like with Henry, there are a few great moments with Joe that'll make you want to cry as well. I could tell you about how great of an actor Jesse L. Martin is, but I'm sure you already know that, so I'll move on. The third and final dad is Harrison Wells, the man Barry idolizes who isn't telling the gang everything. If Henry is a dad and Joe is a father, then Harrison Wells is a mentor. He does what every great mentor should do, and he teaches Barry to become better than himself. Unfortunately, of the many great qualities he exhibits to Barry and the gang, honesty is not really one of them, and that's all I'm going to say on that matter. You'll start to get what I'm talking about from the end of the first episode. I'd also like to add a little note here and say that the first thing I saw Tom Cavanaugh in was the greatest movie of all time, Yogi Bear, so to see him play this role as well as he does was a bit of a shock to me, to say the least.
Moving on from the dad category, we have our final main character, which is Eddie. I don't really have much to say on Eddie. He's just sort of a guy that's girlfriend doesn't really love him, which sucks, dude. I'm sorry, but yeah, look, Rick Cosnett is great in the role, though. I should mention that, and the character probably wouldn't even get a mention if it weren't for his performance. Here's a couple other shout-outs.
Victor Garber and Robbie Amell are in a couple episodes together, and they're both great. The two sort of have a bit of a Doc Brown and Marty McFly thing going on, so I'm obviously going to like that. Mark Hamill reprises his role from the original TV show as the Trickster, and it's essentially just him doing the Joker again, which is awesome. I wish he was in the show more. Stephen Amell, who plays the Green Arrow, shows up for a crossover episode at one point, and I love Oliver Queen and Barry's relationship so much that I just kind of wish that they had their own separate show together.
Finally, and I do mean finally this time, there's Wentworth Miller as Captain Cold. He's like a reoccurring villain that pops up a lot throughout the course of the show, and I almost like him as much as I like the Reverse Flash, which is a lot because I really like that character. He's very different to the main villain, and he plays off Barry very well. He's not as powerful physically as the Reverse Flash, but he's smart and he's able to get away with a lot of stuff because of that. I really love him. I see a lot of stuff on Twitter where people talk about what their favorite line delivery from a TV show or movie is. I'd just like to end by nominating Wentworth Miller as Captain Cold for literally anything he says. He's so fantastic whenever he's speaking, so he definitely deserves a mention there.
Make the plan, execute the plan, expect the plan to go off the rails, throw away the plan.
Okay, that was a big portion of the video there, and it was a lot of me just sort of gushing, so I should probably bring you back down a bit. To me, The Flash is a perfect show, but a lot of that is because I'm able to look past some of its biggest issues. But maybe you won't be able to do that, so I'm going to try and preempt some of the things that you might find wrong with the show. I'm going to start with what I believe is the biggest issue, and then I'll just talk about some small ones that also may affect your viewing experience. The biggest problem of the show for me is, unfortunately, Iris, and I did hint at that a little bit earlier, but look, I'm not the first person of my complexion and gender to criticize her character, and it would be remiss of me not to mention the fact that over the years, she's received a lot of hate purely because of her race and gender. That's why I don't want to go over the typical talking points about her, because for the most part, I think they're reductive and they don't actually diagnose the issue with the character. I think she's been unfairly judged for a really long time. Most people, particularly in this first season, just sort of say that she's kind of annoying. And look, I kind of agree as well, but if you inspect the issue a little further, I don't think it's really the character's fault.
Iris seems annoying at first because she's constantly pissed off at other characters. Iris is annoyed at everyone because they're not telling her what's going on. She doesn't know that Barry is the Flash, and in all fairness, she's having a completely rational reaction to this because she knows something's up. But as the viewer, someone that does know what's going on, it's really annoying when she keeps whining about it. Because you know, all the other characters do, so why should she be upset? Whenever she comes on screen demanding that she wants answers, it's always framed like she's irrational and that she's at odds with the other characters, but that's not really fair. She has a right to know what's going on, but she doesn't because a lot of the male characters in this want to protect her. You could argue that Barry and Eddie both play a role in this, and I wouldn't stop you, but the biggest perpetrator of this outdated trope is unfortunately her father Joe, which sucks because if he didn't have this weird overly protective crap tacked on to the side of his character, he might be my favourite person on the show. Joe's whole shtick is that he doesn't want Iris finding out about any of the superhero stuff, so he insists that Barry and the rest of the gang don't tell her. He's presented as doing the right thing here when really he's not. He says that he doesn't want Iris to know because that could lead to her getting hurt, but that doesn't really make any sense. You're letting your other child Barry run into burning buildings and save people, and granted he has superpowers, but if you're letting him do that, surely you can let your daughter at least know about it. What it seems to me, Joe, is that either you don't think she's as capable as Barry because she's female, or you're admitting that you care less about the safety of your adopted son. That's not a great spot to be in. The other thing that people dislike Iris for in this season, and look, I'll agree that this reason has a little more rationale, is that she's dating this guy Eddie, who she just doesn't love at all. Their relationship is constantly in jeopardy, and poor Eddie just stays optimistic. But she doesn't love you, dude, I'm sorry. But once again, in fairness to Iris, I think that this is partially because people aren't telling her stuff. Here's where I'm going to spoil just a little bit of the show. Look, it's nothing major, and it's the worst part of the show, but I'm going to talk a bit about Barry and Iris's relationship, so skip to this part of the video if you don't want to hear about that stuff.
Barry is in love with his sister. Let me explain.
Since he was a child, Barry was in love with Iris, and then one day, his mum was murdered and he was forced to move in with her and grow up in the room next to the girl he loves. As such, Barry never really had the confidence to tell Iris about his feelings, and so he spends a large part of the show putting his two index fingers together and biting his lip. I hate the guy not telling the girl about his feelings trope, but I'm going to give Barry a pass on this one purely for the fact that he sort of had some weird circumstances thrust upon him. Over a decade is a little bit long to wait, but whatever, I'll give it a pass. Unfortunately, Iris cops a lot of hate here, because when Barry tells her about his feelings, she kind of doesn't know what to do and in turn just sort of goes crazy with relationship stuff. It's a whole messy story that you really have to watch play out, but I think at least some of the weird crap Iris does can be excused by the fact that she's just found out her best friend slash brother has a crush on her, and that's a lot of information to take on board. Also, Barry is being really creepy and flirting with her on rooftops as the Flash, which is like, what are you doing, bro?
So that's the big issue, but it's mostly contained to one very flawed character, so that's nice. Here's some other smaller things that you might pick up on as well. One thing is that Barry's powers can sort of be a little bit inconsistent. There's been a million videos on the internet, particularly in recent times, talking about this issue, but look, I think for the first season, because he's still learning about what he's doing and how to be a superhero, I don't think it's that much of an issue. I think the writers can write their way around it most of the time. Some of the CGI in the show can definitely get a little bit wonky at times, but look, I think considering that this was 2014 and there was not much else out there like this at the time, I think some of those wonky visuals and maybe like some reused shots, they should get a pass as well. One thing I'll admit is that sometimes I think the show can get very cheesy, but I think it has the same charm that the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies do. There's going to be some lines that probably make you cringe, but whatever. I think for the most part it's fine. There's one episode where the villain is bees. I mean, that's not true. It's a bee lady who makes a lot of bee puns. And her name is Brie Larvin. So there's that, I suppose. The final thing, and I mentioned this earlier, is that it can be a hard show to watch because a lot of what comes after the first season isn't very good. The second season is definitely still really good, and the third season's definitely passable as well, but beyond that point, it just sort of slowly becomes this weird walking husk of a show. A million people smarter than me have talked about the downfall of The Flash, and look, if you want to hear about it, go watch one of those videos, but I implore you, please watch the first season first. If you're looking for a good jumping off point, that's kind of tough because every season ends on a cliffhanger, but I'd say you've got two options. The first season ends on a real nail biter, but I think it works as a great sort of last moment for the show, so you can definitely end there. I personally think that you should go to the end of season 3 though. Some of the stuff in between there is going to be a little bit rough and sketchy, but I think for the most part it maintains that same tone and feel, and going from season 1 to 3 sort of serves as a really nice narrative about Barry's past, present, and future. I'd love to talk more about some of the other seasons of the show in another video, but for now I'll leave it there. So that was a lot of me being negative, but let me remind you why I think you should watch this show. I'm going to end by talking about the finale, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but I do think that it's probably my favorite finale of any TV show ever, so I am going to talk about it in vague generalities.
The mystery of the Reverse Flash and Barry's past come to a head in the finale so perfectly. The episode centers around a decision, and it's one that is built to incredibly well throughout the course of this season. I've watched over this first season like a dozen times, and if I were put in Barry's shoes, I still don't know what I'd do. As I think every good finale does, we spend one last moment with each of our characters. Barry talks to each of the people that he loves, and he remembers why he loves them, and it's really interesting to see what people think after everything that they've gone through together. And then you hit the last 10 minutes. I've told you about how I've cried a million times throughout this first season of the show, but I'm a little baby. That's not saying much. If there's any moment that's going to get you in the feels, it's going to happen in the last 10 minutes of the season. Whether it's sadness or happiness or fear or excitement, I think for a moment, your heart's gonna skip a beat. There's a great video of Kevin Smith watching the final episode out there, which you should definitely go watch once you've finished the show.
As with most things in this world, I think The Flash has fallen victim to a lot of revision. People criticizing the later seasons of the show, people criticizing the first season of the show, and I think there's been a narrative built that maybe The Flash was never good at all. Maybe for some it wasn't, but for me it's never mattered what came next. The first season of the show, in my opinion, is perfect. And while I appreciate people criticizing and analyzing it, I do hope that people never forget what it meant to me and so many other people. Maybe I am just crazy. Maybe I'm just some kid that watched the show and has never really been able to let go. But when I watch that finale, I don't know. Maybe it is the stars aligning, because I just can't help but love it.